Welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video commentary series. Hi, Mary Ann here, and I'm glad you could be with me. This commentary was inspired by a James Bartley interview that I recently watched, wherein he interviews Jerry Marzinsky, a 35-year veteran mental health care practitioner counselor, having worked in the states of Georgia and Arizona during that time. And the focus of this particular interview is his experience with paranoid schizophrenics. And you're probably wondering what that has to do with you and your self-mastery work and the conscious journey of awakening. But the information is directly relevant, particularly to those of us who have experienced regressive force interference, entity interference. And the interview itself, Jerry gets into a wide range of particular case studies, and very interesting to say the least. But ultimately, the conclusion that he draws is that contrary to what the psychiatric field has always put forth, not just to the public, but the way they treat these patients, but in the psychiatric educational system, that these voices that these people hear are hallucinations, when in fact they're not. And so again, I highly recommend that you watch this interview, because a lot of other things come forth in that. And what I'm going to be looking into today are three key nuggets of information that did come forth in that interview. And if you're not familiar with James Bartley's work, then I cannot recommend him enough. He is the researcher's researcher, a superb interviewer, and his commentaries and interviews with people cover such a broad range of topics. And he not only goes wide, but he goes deep. His own particular background is in the UFO, alien contactee, abductee, MyLab area of research, but also intelligence, counterintelligence, military history, and on and on and on. I guess what's most appealing to me about his work is twofold. Or multifaceted, not just two areas, but he is someone who is clearly on a journey of awakening himself, and the progression of his work over the years reveals that. He is, rather than taking a sensationalist or in-your-face approach to presenting a wide variety, by way of his interviews, of experiences that people are having. And it's big and powerful, and the range is just incredible, the types of experiences that people are having. And he's someone who also carefully vets who he does interview. He doesn't interview just any old body. So, and beyond that, his commentaries on what's actually going on in terms of, for example, false flag events, political unfoldings. I can't even recall to explain to you. But anyway, more than anything, another thing that he does so beautifully is share his own experiences. But he weaves them in thoughtfully and in ways that support the listeners. It's not about him. It's about conveying information and conveying it in such a way that it supports the listeners. So anyway, I could go on all day about James. I will also, in addition to a link to this interview, will provide a link to his website. And I'm sure many of you are already familiar with his work, but for those who aren't, you will be your consciousness will be significantly expanded, and your level of awareness of the way things work, the kind of things that are really going on that mainstream media news will never or hardly cover except in a sensationalist or mocking sense. But anyway, please visit those links. You will not regret it. In any case, what I'm going to be focusing on today is 3 key information nuggets that arose during the course of this interview, and be fleshing them out and tying them directly to those of us on a conscious journey of awakening. And no, you don't have to be a schizophrenic to benefit from what I will be sharing with you today. It relates to all of us, to any one of us who have undergone or had the experience of interference by regressive forces, entities, aliens, so forth. So with that in mind, here we go. And it will likely be a 2-part commentary, because I'm going to also be imparting a number of ways in which you can actually take the information that I'm going to be exploring today and apply it in your work, in your self-mastery work. So the first nugget of information that is priceless relates back to a prior commentary in which I explore and discuss ways to support those of you who have found yourselves alone on this journey. As a result of actions you're taking, change in your energies, changes in your actual life, perhaps career changes, and so forth. In any case, relationships kind of falling by the wayside from that perspective, and how to use that time, that alone time, to keep moving forward and support yourself and continue growing through that experience. The connection I'm going to make to the point I'm going to bring up today is when we find ourselves alone, and as a result of regressive force interference, either through those that we've been in relationship with or through ourselves. Thought interference, emotional tweaking, ramping up, that sort of thing. And the point that I want to convey is related directly to isolation. Finding yourself basically completely cut off from relationships with others. And for some of us, this happens kind of all at once. Perhaps you're between jobs all of a sudden, and personal relationships have fallen by the wayside, and you really are finding yourself isolated. Well, in the context of regressive entity or force or alien interference in that area, isolation is a tactic, one of the foundational tactics that abusers use upon their intended prey, their victims. They will interfere with those around you, amplify your own regressive thoughts, fears, insecurities, ramp all that up. And the goal being, to the best of their ability and your level of awareness to understand what's going on, to get you isolated. And this is very common. I mean, this is part of the deal when it comes to schizophrenics, but not only schizophrenics. Many people who are not schizophrenics experience this, finding themselves in isolation. And the abusers do their best to arrange things this way because that's when you're most vulnerable, particularly those of us who have been ego identified and therefore attached to that relationship or relationships or the people in those relationships, the others. This is a very vulnerable time, and the regressive entities latch onto that. And this is why they go about doing their best to get us isolated, particularly under the circumstances I just mentioned, because it's just like an open door, an invitation for them to come in and really start working you. So isolation. Look at your particular situation. Take a look at how you got there. What was the dynamics of the kinds of interactions between you that were going on between yourself and the other person. Their behaviors that might be indicative of regressive interference, your own behaviors, insecurities, fears, whatnot, that could well be regressive force interference. And keep that in mind. That's why it really is important that if you are feeling alone and lonely and isolated and suddenly find yourself feeling really off-center, your negative regressive thoughts are just amplified and you're having more of them than ever. Keep turning inward, of course, always. And looking out, watching yourself and what's going on as the observer, as the witness. Doing your best to step outside of what's going on so that you can really look at it. You know, putting aside, not about suppressing, but putting aside emotions. Doing your best to quiet your mind. To quiet those thoughts. And looking and trying to get a handle on what might really be going on. So that is always the case. Always observing in that sense. Paying attention. But also making a point to reach out to other people. Even if it's just in, day-to-day activities. Maybe you run to the store. Strike up a conversation with somebody else, another shopper, or the people at checkout, to the best of your ability. Just connect with other people. And if that doesn't really work for you, then reach out to myself or someone like me. Contact someone to help keep you grounded, someone who understands what may be going on and can help you find ways to address it and move beyond it. And not just be dealing with it, but also using it to grow and expand and enhance your efforts and your progress on the journey of awakening and your self-mastery work. So isolation. Take a close look. If that's what you're going through right now, become the observer, the non-judgmental, non-active participant in what you're seeing. You're not emotionally engaged or invested in what you're watching, but quieting the mind. And I'll get more into that probably in part 2 of this, but ways to quiet the mind and why, even beyond this isolation situation, that it's important that you do that. Okay, so that's the first key point. The next nugget that came out in this interview, the James Bartley-Jerry Marzinsky interview, is the truth that what you consider to be your thoughts are not yours. In the interview, Jerry references Emanuel Swedenborg, who discussed this same thing 700 years ago. And I'm not really a follower of Swedenborg's work, but then I'm not a follower of anybody's ideologies. I look at a lot, as many as I can, but I don't adhere to any of them. No attachments, no identification, but there's a lot of good information out there. And Jerry mentions Swedenborg a couple of times in this context. And there is a part 2 to the interview. And to see that, again, I recommend James Bartley's work. And you can watch the second part of that interview by joining his, becoming a member at his site. And it's all there. You'll find all the information when you click on the link below. But anyway, and the mystics, the adepts, all of them have addressed this key truth, that thoughts are not ours unless or until we take them in and try to claim them. But they're not ours. They don't. So now you're saying, okay, if they're not ours, what does that really mean? Most people, unless you're really, unless you've been on this journey for a while, and have come to this realization yourself, most people believe that thoughts that are derived from the mind, and in some cases people even believe from the brain, but that's not the case. And the same, well, I'll get back to that in a minute, but so let's look at that. First of all, if they don't come from the brain, then, what is the brain? What is the brain? What purpose does the brain serve? Well, obviously, it is the hard drive, so to speak, of the mind-body complex. It is a processor, again, in terms of computer. And I do not think that we are computers, but there's a lot of analogies that can be made. The brain is a processor of information and organizer of thoughts. Okay? Well, then you might say, well, then don't thoughts come from the mind? Well, what is the mind really? The mind is our interface, the interface between brain, mind-body complex and consciousness itself, by way of core self, soul, and the whole of consciousness. All right. So where do thoughts come from? Consciousness itself, The whole of consciousness comprises more than you or I can ever comprehend. But in general terms, within consciousness comprises many layers and planes of consciousness, types of consciousness. The baseline level, regressive and progressive. Those are the two basic forms of consciousness, which comprises potential, vital energy, in both cases, pervasive throughout the whole of consciousness, both within regressive and its progressive aspects. But it also comprises various, as I said, various planes and levels of consciousness. And one of those planes is the so-called universal mind, the mind of consciousness. And I'm not going to get into any mechanics because I do not know, wouldn't presume to know, or to tell you that I know how all of this works. But there is a plane of thought. And it is my understanding, through the knowledge that I have, that that plane of mind is different and goes and moves up and down different levels of density, which is density being levels of awareness. Third density, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. So the corresponding mind plane of thought, would likely vary from density to density. Different types of thought. Yes, each plane would still comprise both regressive and progressive thoughts, but at different levels of awareness. So the kinds of thoughts comprising these different levels of planes of consciousness, the planes of mind, would be of higher and higher order knowledge. Pretty straightforward. Now, the whole of consciousness, again, core component is vital energy. Thus, every kind of energy, the whole consciousness itself, and any expression or type of energy arising from consciousness, whether that be the energy of mass, the energy of sound, the energies of light, electromagnetic energy, and on and on and on, all energy vibrates. Constant movement, constant vibration. And as I'm sure you well know, even matter that is dense in nature, like this desk, and to a lesser extent dense, this body, constantly vibrating. All the different components of the mind-body complex are vibrating, constantly vibrating. Your heart center, that field of energy, has an overall vibratory output. Now there's different layers of vibrations and frequencies of vibration within that center, just like each of your organs has multiple, but an overall or overarching aggregate vibration, if you will. And you also know that like attracts like. Energies of similar vibratory frequency are attracted to each other. And in the case of thought, various thoughts come into our mind, come to mind. Think about many of the expressions commonly used that we don't think about, but that's one of them. It's an old one. That just came to mind. Well, that's what's really happening. It came. It didn't derive from your mind or this body. It came because it was attracted to some vibration or multiple vibrations within the mind-body complex. In particular, the vibrations that are emitted by way of our emotions. Emotions and thoughts are intricately interwoven. And we attract thoughts based on, primarily, there are other vibrations that could be influencing as well, but in particular, the vibration of emotion. Now, you might think that when you're sitting and you're calm and you're not really thinking about anything, you're just sort of drifting mentally, you're relaxed, maybe you're watching TV, God forbid. Let's say, okay, you're watching a movie, and you have the overall sensation, or you're not really paying attention to the state of your body. Perhaps there is some slight tension in your shoulders, or maybe a little bit of tightness in your chest, but you're not really paying attention. Well, that tightness and that tension is flowing from one or more of your emotions, your state, your emotional state. You see, emotions are an innate part of the current, in this regressed state, mind-body complex. They're nonstop. And this is why it's so important to gain self-mastery of all of these aspects of ourselves, to become fully aware of, to learn how to and when to move through, step out. And again, I'll get more into some of the mechanics of actually addressing thought toward the end of this video, this particular one, or in a part 2. But anyway, it's vibrational. It's vibrational attraction that brings thoughts from consciousness into this mind-body complex in response to, by and large, not completely, but emotional vibrations that are moving through this mind-body complex. Vibrational attraction. Now, having said that, perhaps you're someone who really has done a lot of emotional clearing of distortions, these beliefs and attachments and so forth. And by and large, your body vibrational level is pretty high in frequency. But it doesn't take much at all, particularly if regressive forces see you as a potential threat to the way things are. And you might say, well, what kind of a threat am I? I'm just doing my work. Well, unlike you and me, for the most part, these higher density beings can see a little further down the road and around and other timelines and so forth. And the very fact that you're on a conscious journey of awakening and working to regain self-mastery, you might be sought out. And it doesn't take much at all, particularly for the more advanced, higher density regressive beings to hook into. Remember, they always have something, they always have to have something that's within you to hook into. In other words, if you were free, completely free of any lower vibrations, lower frequency vibrations, you know, in an ideal situation, they have nothing to hook into. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to be laden or being inundated by negative thoughts and corresponding emotions for negative entities, these regressive folks, to be able to attack you psychically, either through others or by hooking into your thoughts, your feelings, and ramping them up, injecting more that are related, maybe a whole lot more perverse or negative, but they're hooking in. So this takes me back to, you know, the karmic thing. The folks that believe that if you are being, if you're having interactions with aliens or demons or any kind of regressive entity or force, that it's karmic. In other words, it's only because you know, it's part of the balancing process, which means that if it's really intense, the attacks are really intense, then gee, you must have done something really pretty bad, pretty regressive, if not in this lifetime, another, or perhaps in another version of yourself. And that could be true. However, in light of what I was just talking about just prior to this, even people who are really pretty far, are progressing really far along on their journey of awakening, to say that those people are doing something wrong is ridiculous. Or even in my prior examples, it's not as though you're doing anything wrong. It's always about awareness. This is why awareness and this whole self-mastery process, because that's foundational to the self-mastery process, is continually increasing, amping up, expanding your level of awareness. And awareness of what? Yourself, what you really are, how you're moving through this reality, the people in your life, your environment, what's really going on in the world, not just at higher density levels and the non-physical level, but on the 3D plane itself, because many insights are afforded us in watching that unfoldment. In fact, that's how most of us start out on the journey. That wasn't my case, but many start out on the journey of awakening because they have become aware. They're so frustrated or just downright pissed off at the way things are unfolding in the pure 3D, and I use that term loosely because this really isn't a third density, third dimension reality. I'll address that again in a minute, but that's how many people began this journey. Sometimes they get caught up in that aspect of it and never get any further. They go down so many rabbit holes, and it's good to investigate a whole range of topics and go into many of them very deeply. It's just a tightrope act that you have to walk to keep from getting stuck in various rabbit holes along the way. So that information is important, but in tandem with the inner realms, the higher density realities and dimensions and so forth. Both are vital in conjunction with awareness of what you really are, an ever expanding awareness of what you are, how you really work, your energy centers. And when I speak of the 3 energy centers, I am not discounting those who have and work with chakras. If you want to substitute, just substitute chakras for energy centers, although your energy centers are there. And I just work from that basis. If you work with chakras, please continue doing so. If that's what if you feel comfortable and in tune with that, then do it. So whenever I speak of working with the 3 primary energy centers, the mind, the heart, the pelvic center, and then you can just substitute or add on rather than substitute, because there are 3 primary centers. If you're also working with chakras, great, bring that in. But awareness of how those centers, what you're generating, emitting, how you're using those centers, how those energy centers are interacting, your overall energy field. Awareness. Experimentation increases awareness. Staying in communication with core self, soul. And while I'm on that specific topic, in terms of core self evolution, and that's basically what's going on here. The soul is attempting that's always working at evolving itself through all of its different expressions. This mind-body complex being just one extension, one version of itself in one particular reality at one time. And all of the versions of itself are unfolding simultaneously in myriad densities, dimensions, realms, realities throughout the whole of consciousness. But our focus in this work is this expression of soul. Now, soul consciousness is only one step removed, although it's not removed at all. So language is so tricky here. But soul consciousness is, in effect, individuated consciousness, in contrast to totality consciousness, the direct experience, awareness, knowing of the whole of consciousness and you as that. But my focus is, except for some of the advanced work that I do, is on individuated consciousness, the consciousness of soul. That's what we seek to increase and expand within ourselves. But in any case, thoughts are not mind-body complex, personality, ego in their origins. They come into us based on vibration. So, now in the interview, the James Bartley-Jerry Marzinsky interview, what's touched on there in terms of thought not being ours is that, quote, negative regressive thoughts aren't ours. But taking what I just told you to its logical conclusion, the whole vibrational aspect of ourselves interacting, or as expressions of consciousness interacting with itself, the logical conclusion is that no form of thought, neither regressive or progressive in nature, are ours. So what is, in the next, in part 2 of this, I'll get into what that means in terms of addressing that, working with that vital knowledge that your thoughts are not, although your vibrations, primarily your emotional vibrations, but not all, but primarily through emotion, draw in, bring into yourself, attract into through the mind, based on your emotions, the frequency level of your emotions, and the overall mind-body complex, and it's your greater energy field and so forth, but derivative primarily of emotional vibration. The third key point that I want to address, or actually not the third key point, I'll get to that in just a minute, but as an add-on to what I've just been talking about, let's take a step back. These entities that are psychically and otherwise doing their best to attack us and draw, take our energies for whatever purposes, either to feed upon or whatever other regressive purposes are on their little agendas or their big agendas. But if thoughts aren't our own, that would also mean that these regressive thoughts are not the thoughts. They don't originate with the negative entity or entities that are messing with you and me. They're attracting, their thoughts are coming to them based on their own, the vibrations that they're emitting. And they may not have emotions in the same way that you or I do, but the vibration of their mind-body complex. Even invisible entities, those that not only they've either chosen not to make themselves visible, or they're unable to because they're from different levels of densities, higher densities that aren't yet compatible. The only way that they can work through or work in this density dimension is through other mind-body complexes that are compatible with this reality, this density, this dimension. So, and then there are regressive forces that, even if they wanted to, no longer have the capacity to generate any sort of form, quote, physical or even non-physical form. Because even so-called non-physical entities, and I'm speaking to starting with our density up through maybe the 5th or 6th, physicality in those densities is not the same as physicality in our reality, in this density dimension of our reality. Because remember, our reality, our energy system is multidimensional, multiple density. So I'm speaking of third density, third dimension. But in higher densities, physicality is not the same. It is, in other words, beings there are not physical. Even those that have physical bodies, physicality is not the same as it is for you and me. It is less dense, significantly less dense than this mind-body complex. And there's all sorts of other differences, but physicality is not the same throughout densities and dimensions. Okay? But in any case, these extremely regressive forces, what some would call demons, just these, for example, the black on black type of entity. It's almost completely energetic in nature, lacking in potential. It's almost completely comprising regressive consciousness. In particular, the energy aspect of consciousness, as opposed to the potential aspect of consciousness. So it's just this amorphous, yes, sometimes they can, for short periods of time, some of them, but not the most regressed, can present themselves or present the illusion of physicality, a physical form, but it's done mainly through psychic manipulation. They cause us to see something, and this doesn't mean that we're making it up or that it's a hallucination, but can cause us to see a form when one perhaps isn't there. Doesn't mean that it isn't real. I'm not discounting that, but they can use all sorts of techniques and tactics to, if they want, and they have the capacity to generate forms. Some of them can do this. Aliens as well, not just regressive forces, but even, and I would say in particularly, some of the higher density races and beings use this tactic a lot. Projecting energetically a form, a being that's not really actually there. It is there, but it's not, like I said, in the context of what I just said. Again, it doesn't mean that you're making it up, but they use technologies to make us see things. Whatever is going to serve, whatever their particular purpose is in that interaction at that time. These beings, again, just like you and me, they're working through thoughts that have come to them that they're attracting out of their higher density planes of mind. And because they are regressive dominant in nature, remember, everything's a mix. Every expression is a unique mixture of both progressive and regressive, but I'm talking about the regressive dominant beings and entities. Their thoughts are not their own either. Keep that in mind. It's not an excuse for what they do, the actions they take. It's just about knowledge, because just knowing that can open increase your awareness and open you to higher order knowledge in terms of what knowing that could mean, in terms of your own life and your own experiences, your own higher order perspectives of what's going on within us and around us. And all of us, beings, entities, these humans, everybody, every being and entity that has conscious awareness in a from a sentient, a higher level sentience, as opposed to animals and plants, for example, rocks, minerals, that sort of thing. Sentient beings are responsible for your vibrational level and the thoughts that you are attracting, and ultimately the behaviors that arise from thoughts and emotions coming together in the form of action. We're each responsible. That regressive being that's been messing with you is, even though the thoughts don't originate from him, his regressive thoughts, he's responsible for that. And his behaviors, his resultant behaviors. But this point is important. It's not just a factoid. This is information you can use, and I'll explain that when we get into how to use some of this information. Excuse me one moment. I'm going to turn off the AC because it makes a noise. Bear with me. Okay. Now, the third point, although I've already touched on it and stepped into it a bit, is the fact that it isn't just schizophrenics that are subjected to the horror of entity interference. They're just some extreme examples of what's going on with everybody. Whether the individual is aware of it or not, he, she is being manipulated at certain points, being perhaps a temporary host for some of these beings and entities, or on a more permanent basis if a psychopath or an extreme narcissist or borderline personality disorder individual, whatever. But the entities that are occupying them, for which you and I have all been portals for these beings at some point, even in this lifetime. Of course, there's a handful of exceptions. There's exceptions to everything, but most people on this planet have not only been attacked, and they didn't know that that's what was happening by way of another person, but they've been used themselves. We all have been. And it's during those times that we are not aware, first of all, of that any of this stuff even goes on. But even after we are aware, if we're not vigilant, if we haven't mastered and gotten really familiar with our energies and using them to sense not only inward but outward, our energy field, our energy centers, and to become really sensitive to other energies, entities, forces around us, so that we can discern between our fields and the fields of others, the energies of others. And this is really important, not just as part of the self-mastery process, but directly related to self-mastery is being able to, when you can discern, when you're intimately familiar with your baseline energies and fields, you're keeping them clean and clear, you can detect when there's leakages and so forth. You know that you may not have worked through all of them, but distortions and so forth. It becomes a practical matter of self-protection. In other words, wow, okay, that's the thought that just came to me is similar to many, many thoughts I've had, but there's something different about this. This is a little more nasty or quite a bit darker than my typical range of thought. So it becomes a practical matter as well as just a growth matter and self-mastery matter. This is how we defend ourselves, is through our energy systems from these external, non-physical, regressive interferences. That's it. Energies. Being able to use our energies of thought, emotional energies, in the right ways, in progressive ways, but those energies are center energies. Our external fields, the energies, and learning how to project and concentrate and expand or contract according to whatever situations we're in. So it's a practical matter as well, because these interferences are always pulling at us, always seeking to expand themselves in our life and our life situations. They're relentless. And remember, either people that really are struggling with a lot of regressive vibrations that attract these thoughts, or they've become more subtle as you've worked through and released a lot of distortions and regressive energies over time. The slightest little bit, particularly when it comes to, like I said, the advanced rather than some of the lower level, higher density beings. Lower levels are typically about feeding. They want to feed upon, the mass, the demonic types. That's the only way they can survive. That type of, the demonic type energies. A little higher than that, they feed on it. They're lazy. They've grown addicted to it, to taking our energies as opposed to generating their own. But the higher level, the more advanced, higher density beings often latch into it. It's the adepts and mystics that had some of the most intense, regressive, negative entity interferences, because they're messed with, are very intelligent, very highly advanced, regressive entities who understand, they know that the adept or the mystic or the highly progressed seeker, highly advanced seeker, they want to nip it in the bud, throw them off course, knock them back as many notches as they can along the journey of awakening and self-mastery processes. And so they look for the slightest vibratory opportunity to hook in. And if the individual isn't keenly aware of and familiar with their own energies and vibrations, then bit by bit over time, perhaps some major event in their life unfolds. And so they're distracted. They're caught up in thought again, as opposed to working beyond thought through consciousness. And I'll talk about that in the follow-up to this, the follow-up commentary, but that vigilance is gone for the moment. Whoosh, these regressive entities, they're opportunists. They're always looking for to get there. All they have to do is get their foot in the door, and then they work it. If the individual is not on top of things. That's why part of self-mastery is constant vigilance. That non-emotionally or thought-invested observation. Non-judgmental. Clarity of observation as the witness. Remaining ever vigilant. Okay? On that note, I'm going to call it a wrap. And I will continue this in the next commentary, continue with this, and we'll get more into some of the actual steps, a few more of the workings, and different steps you can take, some of the foundational steps of the self-mastery attainment process. In any case, I hope this information was of benefit to you. If so, and if you haven't already subscribed, I hope you'll subscribe. And the best place to do that is on my website, because you will also be notified of articles and other resources as they're published, in addition to notification of new commentaries as they come out. And if these are of benefit to you, these commentaries, I hope you'll share them with others on this journey, and so that they can be of benefit to them as well. In any case, I will see you in the next commentary. Until then, take care on your journey. Hang tough. And keep moving. Until next time, bye-bye.